merge.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. This is it.
Now you have to behave.
Now,
Exactly.
no more four-letter words.
Not at all. Well, I'd like to say on behalf of Nenad Bach and Michael Spudik, my name is David Amram. I'm a co-host. And one of the wonderful things about the Hangoutology program is other people can exercise their First Amendment rights and say something. I won't be Mr. Monologue, Dr. Hogwell, because you don't have to watch Nenad's beautiful program in order to see egomaniacs take over and putrefy the planet. So
It's happening. We have to stay
feeling?
optimistic. David, you've lived through so many generations of ups and downs. What do you think when you wake up in the morning these days? Is there hope?
Oh, there is, because when I wake up in the morning, Michael, I'm very much down. And my first instinct is, maybe I should sleep another 3 hours. I don't. But then I realize if I get up from the down position and manage not to fall down, and after about 5 minutes, I say, wow, it's another day. I've got all this stuff I'm supposed to be doing that I'm supposed to have done. So I better get started. And each new day is like an amazing thing. So I always put all the dishes in the washer. So when I wake up in the morning, I can feel I'm impersonating an organized adult with a clean house. So at 91, I've actually become housebroken.
So do you put the dishes at night and then they are clean in the morning?
Well, I sometimes I guess it's kind of a bebop kind of something in my system. No matter what happens around 12:30 at night, and regardless of all the stuff I might have been doing all day and all evening, suddenly I get this burst of mental clarity and energy. So my problem is trying to get to sleep before I have to get up the next morning, or before it is the next morning.
Yeah. I just tested today the dishwashing machine without soap, just with water, and
Right.
it's fine. It's clean. It,
Unfortunately, you postponed your meeting a little later. So after I was interviewed for 3 hours by someone from the Voice of America, who is the stepson of a guy who came to my basement apartment in 1952 when Charlie Parker was there. We all played together. And it was just amazing to hear from him. And sure enough, he has this wonderful program he does for 53 countries.
Wow.
He outdoes Michael Spudik and you in the international department. And
Relations.
what he recorded was so nice, and the woman he was with was terrific. And they were really beautiful people. And all the things that they asked me about were things that I've hoped to share. And I realize now a lot of people in those places will hopefully not just get a picture of what I'm doing, but realize I'm a product of this country and these many cultures in this country, and that there are a lot of people like me who don't have the chance to communicate with them ever or visit them, and they can see that they're also human beings on this side of the pond who are very similar to them, that we hope we can have some kind of fulfilled life, have enough to eat, have a place to crash, and have a family that will speak to us and be in harmony. And those aren't big, complicated things, stuff that we take for granted. And often, if we watch enough commercials, assume that they're not important, that those simple things of life are just for squares or schmucks, and that if you're really hip, you can bypass all that stuff and be a great individual egomaniac swine, and then you've really done something. So it's an uphill battle for us to try to keep it for real. And one of the nicest things is to be able to communicate with other people like that, not only here, but in other countries. And for people in other countries to see, perhaps there's a lot of people here, including those who work in the arts, that aren't trying to rip everybody off, don't believe that there's a sucker born every minute, things of beauty stay beautiful, and that the old-fashioned ethics of hard work, respect for others, sharing and caring mean a lot to a lot of people here. And we're not the ones that they see on television. We're not the ones who they see on commercials advertising the various garbage pits that we say are the American dream, but rather they're seeing what so many people here are really like. And those of us like yourself and Nemeth and myself who travel a lot in this country as well as overseas can see how beautiful America really is because of the people who are here who are that way. And they have no visibility. Thank God for the internet. So you can go and watch, see, hear other people and what they have to offer. So with that rather lengthy non-answer to your question, I will give up my 19 and a half hour sermon. And Nemeth, I want to hear what you got to say. And Michael, I want to hear what you've got to say. And I know everyone else does
Well,
too.
may I just ask, David, did you say the gentleman that interviewed you today met you in 1952?
Yeah, this was the person from the Voice of America named Aaron, and he's the stepson of a wonderful guy named Bill Sanders, who came to my basement
Okay,
apartment in
that was his
1952 with
stepfather.
Charlie. He and the widow of Stan Levy, the drummer who was also there playing with Charlie Parker, two people I've spoken to in the last year. Well, Bill passed away about, I guess, about 2 years ago, but before that, I always was in touch. I said, man, glad you guys are still here. So I realized it wasn't just a fantasy, but a memorable, incredible evening. And that's the nice thing about getting older. When I'm doing at 91, now that I'm getting my honorary doctorate, the eighth one I've received, but this was from the New England Conservatory. I didn't know at the time that the person who was the conservatory uh, speaker, James Taylor, the great folk singer, by an amazing coincidence, Janice Ian invited me to a concert that I'm going to be playing this on the 7th. And at that concert, I'm playing with Livingston Taylor, who's James's brother. And I made a record with James producing, I got about 20 some years ago with his sister Kate, where I played the whistle. And the other guy in the program is, aside from Janice Ian, who's so wonderful, is Tom Chapin. And Tom, who I've known for years, I also knew his brother Harry, and I'm reading a book tomorrow night and the night after that of Harry Chapin's book. And all these things are happening in 1 week where I'm I'm going to be playing with Tom the night before. All these things are happening within 1 week's time. Now, no career counselor or astrologer or guru, dope dealer, psychiatrist, or anybody of that nature said, if you do this, it'll lead to that. When I met Nemeth almost 40 years ago at Bradley's, I never thought that's why I would be on his show this evening. And the same thing as when I met you, everything's just been a blessing. And there are a lot of other people I meet, everybody actually, where something sort of fits into a whole great picture of hangoutology. So I recommend for everybody, keep your mind open, keep your door open. Don't hoard your phone number or yourself or your contacts, and be a reclusive miser, because that gives you the gout. People who have the gout get that terrible affliction because they eat too much, overeat, don't exercise, and are kind of have a selfish way of lifestyle. And as a result, the body can't stand that. And the soul cannot stand miserly, nasty, selfish, narcissistic behavior. And all of us that are told that that's the hippest way to behave have to somehow graciously find a way to cure that addiction. And hanging out with other people and your family is the best way to do that, because your kids or your relatives or your old friends might say, especially in my case, don't talk so much. So I'm going to listen.
Way to go, way to go.
I'm not going to disappear. I'm going to join your audience, the millions of people who turn into the Nenad Bach show every week.
That's right. It's global.
It's called hangoutology.
All the hangoutologists around the world unite.
Absolutely. And that could be everybody and everybody. That is everybody.
Yes, there's no one is excluded.
We're all that way till we're told that person can't do you any good. So just act like it's some insect that you don't see. Oy vey. Talk about throwing your humanity, whatever it is, and whatever you might have to offer, not to mention all that you might learn, right down the fashion plate career counselor toilet and losing the chance just to keep on trying to be human and trying to learn something. And there's a lot to learn. And it's amazing what you can learn from people if you don't have what they used to call in the 1950s an attitude. So if you don't cop that attitude and you just say, well, I guess I'm just another hayseed from another part of the great hayloft of life, you can hang out with everyone else. And eventually, they might not even know that you're paying attention. You can learn a whole lot just by that.
Osmosis.
Osmosis.
Osmosis, yeah. By osmosis, you can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Charlie Chin told me that. He said, David, now that you're going to be a father, you have to remember the old Asian concept of child rearing. I said, what? He said, no, we believe in osmosis. When we bury that egg, we assume that in 1,000 years, that egg will be totally nutrified. So our 1,000-year-old egg actually is about a month or 2 months old at the most. We take it from the ground, all those wonderful nutrients are entered into the egg. You said when we have kids, we bring them to the best things that we can do, even if they're free, even if it's an art museum or a free concert or be with some nice people, and the kid looks like it's not paying any attention. We don't slap them and say, pay attention, you're missing something profound. You just cool it and let them be there. And by osmosis,
Right.
which is what you said, which is what Charlie said, I never forgot, the osmosis, that will enter into their being and that will become part of their DNA and part of their psyche and how they are. And he was right.
Yeah. So what do you say about my dishwashing machine that I use without soap?
With soap or without soap? Is
Without soap.
that a mental reason, Nenad, that you didn't use soap?
That today I figure out why because the water is very hot, very boiling hot.
Yes.
But why do you need soap?
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, that's a good question. I remember someone gave Jeffrey Gates, a wonderful old friend of mine, gave me a great big bar of soap. I said, Jeff, man, what a great present. That's the most elegant soap. He said, see if you can try using it. Well, this was about 30 years ago. I realized I was in such a frenzy. I forgot that taking a bath or a shower every day is not a federal crime or sin.
Oh.
If you're lucky enough to be able to have one. We've all been in places like 90% of the world where there are no baths or showers available. If you're lucky, you can jump in the river if you're or the ocean if you're in a place where that's possible because of the temperature. And then having a bath and a shower and a bar of soap is a great thing.
Mhm.
And conversely, your own personal aroma might not necessarily drive everyone else into looking for an oxygen tent to recover. But he gave me this beautiful bar of soap, and every time I take my bar of soap, I think of that. And all those things that we take for granted are something that most of the world doesn't have. So whenever I think any of us feel, watching those hypnotic television commercials, I got to get that. I got to get this. I have to become that in order not to be disgusting. Really, just those simple things that we're taught when we're kids are pretty terrific. And it's amazing watching the refugees, watching those mothers with their little children, and how somehow the people that are in such a horrible situation are finding a way to still keep their humanity. And this isn't only true in Ukraine. A lot of people like that are living and have lived that way all over the world. That's why a lot of us wish that Mr. Musk, who's a very adventuresome person, when he had people pay millions of dollars to go into outer space and put up $1 billion, whatever, perhaps if he had bought a sandwich for everybody in the world, 75 million or 70, whatever, 750, I don't know the number of people who were literally starving. If he just bought a sandwich for every person who didn't have a meal that night, and every kid, probably would have cost him less, and I'll bet he would be happier and the world would be happier. I'm not saying we should tell him what to do, because that's his money. But what we can do is try to see perhaps if we can, whatever little we have to offer, try and share at least a hello or a smile for starts, and then go on to be doing something human. And that's the reason why it's so wonderful working in music, and which Michael does, and what Emmett has been doing for ever since I met him and before I met him, and so many other people are doing, because basically it's about sharing something beautiful with others, not necessarily anything to do with yourself, except that you were lucky enough to be part of something and you'd like just to share that. It's not a business per se. That part of it is not anything to do with business. It's to do with being human and being healthy.
Agreed. David, when
Whenever you take your hat off, it's time for me to stop.
that's right.
I
David, you mentioned the year 1952. You were just a mere, what, 22 years old, and you're making.
Well, actually, when I met Charlie Parker, I was just turned. It was February, late January or February of 1952. I just had turned, because I was born in 1930, so I was still 21 years old. And when I met Dizzy in 1950, I was 19 years old, about to turn 20. And Dimitri Metropolis, the great conductor whom I dedicated my first book to, I was 14. And a whole bunch of other people who never got world famous, who taught me so many lessons. I met when I was a teenager. I always met enough people. So when I saw the creepy, nasty, draggy, horrible, rotten, disgusting, humiliating people that made me just feel like a piece of garbage, I understood that that was not the only thing in the adult world that I could aspire to becoming. I had some good role models and a wonderful mother and a father that somehow put up with me. I don't know how they did it.
by default.
I was very fortunate in that regard, and grateful.
Yeah, that was by default. Osmosis by default.
Exactly. So with all the nutcases that I was and became, I had.
Whoops.
He clicked.
Oh, jeez. David, come back. We lost your video.
It's okay. He's gonna come back. He clicked with the jar.
And he had,
So anyway, how are you doing?
oh, fine. It's the runaround. I went to a gig over at Joe's Pub. Wonderful baritone sax player was on it, and a human rights activist from Vietnam performed her original music.
Let me just send it.
It was fascinating, the message she's conveying, and musically done very well, very skillfully.
Yeah.
Musicians were great.
Joe Pub is open, so people are wearing masks. Or
Yeah, I was watching that whole scene. Welcome back, David.
Sorry, I was gesturing with my hands, which I'd never stopped doing. And when I lifted up my teacup, the
Runs over.
the straw backed into the computer, and I got suddenly something saying 40-minute limit is up. I said, wait a minute.
Oh, it wasn't that.
Well, then I realized I hit something. So forgive me, gentlemen.
I think Nenad runs a tighter ship than the 40-minute minimum, right, Nenad?
That's the last straw that you,
The last straw.
yeah, that
No,
was the
I
last
think
straw.
the straw hit part of the computer was sensitive to
My
being touched.
sensitive
And
computer.
at first, I thought the computer was saying, "Hold it, man! Your hot air is blowing out cyberspace." But anyway, I concluded.
I mean, you're at the age of 20, 21, 22, a lot of amazing experiences with very, very important people.
Well, the thing is, that they still mean something to me today, and I'm always glad to share those. And if I hadn't done anything since then that would still be good fortune to meet people like that. But the fact that I could remember that and continue and try and, when you say ups and downs, in the most horrendous situations, which I won't bore you with because everybody has those every day, I had something to go back on, realizing that those particular people, like Mr. Metropolis and Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and so many, Pete Seeger and God, all down the list, all of them had to overcome a lot of stuff. And even when they got well known, like Jack Kerouac, sometimes the recognition that they got overcame them and almost destroyed their lives. So there's always a lot to think about. And each day is a new adventure and a new opportunity to try to do something right and to try to improve. And one of the great things, I met Dick Hyman in 1955, and I finally got to play with him a month ago, 60 some years later. I said, wow, what a blessing. And there he is, 96 years old, still playing up a storm and showing me he's interested in music, in other musics besides what he's created and played for so long and so brilliantly. And he's a joy to be with and to play with, and a real musician and a real mensch. And Sir James Galway, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, when I complimented him and said, Sir Jimmy, after I wrote that concerto for you, you spoke to the president of the orchestra. You spoke to the people at the back of the second violin section where nobody in the symphony world acknowledges them as even being human beings.
Second
And the
fiddle.
percussionist and the piccolo player, and you and the person who cleaned up the stage, and the people who were paying for managing it or paying for it, and the customers and the fans. You were nice to everybody. He said, David, where I'm from in Ireland, we don't endorse putting on airs. I said, man, they should put that on the White House, halls of Congress, Harvard University, Juilliard, subway stations, everywhere. Put up big signs. We don't endorse on putting on airs. No one needs that. And he's in a position where he could do that and dump on everybody. And certain group of people would say, that's marvelous that he's putting those subhumans in their place. However, that ain't cool. And that's not what's happening. And people who act that way are insufferable drags to be with, make you feel sick in the stomach, and never seem to be very happy. And generally, if they're lucky enough to have children, the children can't stand them either unless they become that way themselves. So I say to everybody, hangoutology when possible, just be cool. And the old Jewish prayer, Larecha Chamocha Viatafta, excuse me, Viatafta Harecha Chamocha. Oh, I'm saying it wrong. I'm panicking. It's love thy neighbor as thyself. So-called golden rule, which everyone has.
Every
Which
culture.
every Sonny Rollins told me, said, man, every culture, every major religion's got a form of that golden rule. And And that's the real deal. And that way you don't have to dislike or hate anybody or convert anybody or do any or sell anything. You can just be mellow. You can just be part of the beauty of humanity. And you can enjoy being with other people and you can enjoy being by yourself.
Said the second busboy.
Right. Well, when I had that job, I was in the bottom of the servitude situation in 1951 when I was the second busboy at the Opera House. By the time the tips given to the tips given to the tips got down to me, I said, "Whoa, that trickle down theory ain't working." Even though Ronald Reagan
It's not
opened the
enough.
trickle down economics, I saw if it trickles down, there's not somebody, and it made me understand the value of unions and the value of decent behavior and the importance when you were the person trickling it down that you gave everybody the square share that they deserved.
It's a tricking down, not trickling. It's tricking down, trickling.
or skimming off the top.
Yeah.
Floyd Redcore told me the word wasuchi, everybody, which was used for a person of the Caucasian persuasion, we thought applied to people of the Caucasian persuasion. Uh, Floyd Westerman said that actually was an old term referring to anybody who skimmed the fat off the top of that big pot because the plains folks, since they lived in a very, very cold climate, had to make that nutritious stew with the animal buffalo fat or whatever they could get to cook in order to survive. So you had to have some of that stuff that was on the top. Anyone who skimmed off the top was called wasuchi. So it wasn't a racial term, it was a greed term. And most of the greediest people that they encountered were people of the Caucasian persuasion. But they also had black Wasuchi, who they called Wasuchi, and Native American folks, including people from Lakota or Dakota or Nakota or many, many groups, nations they were called. We called them tribes. But they got that term because everybody assumed that became a nickname for white people who were a drag and abusing them. And actually, the term itself meant those who skim off the top. It's interesting because linguistics can get changed, and suddenly, for example, what Adolf Hitler did with that swastika, that was such a brilliant visual sign that had certain impact. He took it from the Native American folks, reversed it, made a reverse mirror image, but as a mirror does sort of backwards, that became the swastika, completely changing the whole meaning of what it was about. Just as the African American geniuses like Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Thelonious Monk, Kenny Clark, Bud Powell, on and on and on, wore berets, dark glasses like Nemeth has on now, and go paste on, not paste on, but grew goatees because Jean-Paul Sartre and the French Impressionists after World War II got a whole new picture of what they thought we could become now that we had defeated fascism. And they were respected as intellectuals who were creating an important new part of art coming out of the old classic traditions. And that's what Dizzy and Charlie Parker and everyone realized. They were more than barroom entertainers. They were great musical intellectuals and Thelonious Monk and aristocrats of a new, wonderful music that had never been done before, coming out of the roots of their culture and the music that had been created before them. So when the bebop image became fashionable, suddenly after Jack Kerouac's great review, they assumed if this guy looking like a lumberjack could be the great writer, this must be some new movement. So they had something called the Beat Generation, and Maynard G. Krebs became the poster boy for the beatnik, wearing a beret, dark glasses with no lenses inside, paste on goatees saying, "Hey man, like you dig?" and taking all the code language and vulgarizing it. And suddenly, what was originally a beautiful statement of people saying, we have as much significance here in America as these European giants do, got turned around, just like the swastika turned around its original meaning and got turned around into celebrating everybody lying around getting stoned and not doing anything very well and not really caring. The Beat Generation. And the reality is that those of us who were fortunate enough to be around that were part of a much larger picture than we were presented being. So you have to always watch out for labels and check out what's inside the package. We're geniuses at packaging stuff, but what we have to do is become underground geniuses and investigate what that means when they package something and make sure that what's inside the package has anything to do with the value. That's the great thing about the computer. After you see those ads of how you could be groovy, attractive, the king of swinging singles or married cheaters or whatever, and look young when you're 130 and be groovy, successful, and attractive, then you go and you read the fine print, see how many calories are there, or you read, you could freeze the television set if possible and read that tiny stuff that the FDA is forced to print saying, however, this might give you cancer, blindness, a heart attack, see your physician. Or when you go on the computer and you see somebody speaking and you say, man, this is what I've been looking for. Put that in and then put down the word fraud and scam next to it. And the first thing you'll see is their webpage written by them with people who often are paid off to give saying how groovy it is. And then you find out 98% of the time that is worthless and could be bad for your health. I only mention that because snake oil salesmen have always been among us. So we always have to be careful and observant, as they say in the organized crime circuits, always sleep with one eye open.
And one eye closed.
Don't sleep on the subway.
Right.
So I found Wasichu. Wasichu is the Lakota and Dakota word for people of Western European descent. It expresses the indigenous population's perception of the non-natives, the relationship with the land and the indigenous population. Typically, it refers to white people, but does not specifically mention skin color or race.
Right.
Wasichu, W-A-S-I apostrophe C-H-U. Wasichu.
And now, interestingly enough, Nemeth, I would make you a bet. Whoever wrote that never hung out or played music or worked with and for people from the Dakota Nation,
Yeah.
or knew Vine Deloria Jr., the great writer who from there, who was doctor of laws and religion, but remained a Native American spokesman and grew up knowing that language beautifully and knowing the English language beautifully. And Floyd was the same way, even though he became a folk singer and activist. He and Vine were both brilliant kids that were sent to boarding school so that they could become educated enough in the pure culture to be able to sell out their own people's traditions, which neither of them did. I think if the government had realized they were both become brilliant spokespeople, not just for their own people, but for all people, it would have been different. And Floyd didn't take out the dictionary to tell me that. He told me what it meant from the language that he spoke and the people that he knew and the elders that he grew up with. So if that's in the dictionary, that's correct in terms of what the person who wrote the dictionary probably spent a whole lot of research on and was clarifying the cliched version that we receive.
Yeah, it says that it takes the fat. That's direct translation. Takes the fat.
Of course.
Yeah,
And the word honky which would be similar to what I always thought meant a person of when I was in the Army in 52 of the Caucasian persuasion, they were known as au fays or, or a lot of other terms, or Mr. Charlie or whatever. Dick Smith was one of the famous words for in the South for oppressor. There are many code words from many cultures, but when you actually check out honky, that came from the word hunky, and hunky meant someone of the Caucasian persuasion who came from Hungary,
Right.
who were called hunkies,
Hungary.
hunky or bow hunks, and Joe Palooka was always characterized as a hunky, and essentially Joe Palooka was the anti-Hungarian discrimination term that was used for a palooka, which meant someone of a Polish descent who was therefore subhuman, and that's where the definition Polak came from. Now, interestingly enough, when I went to Okima and played the Woody Guthrie Festival, and they had poets, they knew I'd played with Kerouac. Someone got up and said, "I'm Dr. So-and-so. I went to Columbia University. I got my master's degree. I went to Oxford. I got a PhD. And I'm an Okie, and I'm proud of it." I almost fell out of my seat. I said, "What? How could they use that word?" I was almost offended and shocked. Then I understood that people from that part of Oklahoma who struggled so much went through the Dust Bowl or left because they were suffocating and then came back, were very, very proud of the cultural part of Oklahoma that they had. And with all of its tragic history, there was a heroic, beautiful historic part that none of us, including myself, knew about, and probably a lot of other people don't, that made these people who you would think would be brainwashed into saying the last thing I'm going to do is talk about my abysmal background. They said they were proud of being Okies, and they used that as an affectionate term. I still am hesitant to say that because when I'm there, I don't want to sound like some jerk from the Northeast trying to be patronizing or being abusive. But language is an amazing thing, and it can be used and it can be misused.
Oh, yes. Yeah, with the terminology, my parents were from Western Pennsylvania, and I knew of that term hunky from just, and it was a derogatory term and came from,
Sure.
Word for Hungarians. I just wonder for the various groups, immigrant groups, like there are all these, we won't go into all the terms, but I'm surprised that they, I don't know if the Hungarians were the largest group and why they were picked on. And then the Poles are another one, why they're so picked on with this kind of terminology. And of course, the Jews in general, there's every kind of term in the book,
Sure.
It's America too, right? It's our other side, our other half.
Oh, sure.
It's the newcomers, It's a newcomer.
Always about newcomers.
We have to understand that everybody, I thought being brought up Jewish, all those terms, and prejudice and hatred and having to fight every day when I went to public school was directed towards me. And then there was a few black kids or African American kids in school, and they got picked on. So when I moved to Washington, D.C., in what was called the checkerboard neighborhood, that meant black and white folks lived together, even though it was officially segregated by law, we all lived in the same neighborhood. So that was called the checkerboard neighborhood, which I guess kept the rents down from white people who were terrified of anybody that might be less pale than they were, and judged everybody that way. But I never really understood that dynamic till after Jack Kerouac got famous and we started going to all these fancy literary parties. He wore a huge cross around his neck, almost like someone who believed in the Russian Orthodox religion and wore a great big cross. His wasn't quite that large, but it was large, and he had it right there over his lumber jacket, like the one I have on tonight. And people were staring at that. like he was wearing a swastika. And I kept noticing that. I said, Jack, I can't believe these people he said, no, man. He said, they hate Catholics. I said, what? Are you kidding? I said, these are big time liberal people. He said, yeah, no, I said, I know from growing up in Feasterville, Pennsylvania, population 200, the little public school I went to, the kids were all taught to hate Jews and black people, but I didn't know that people hated Catholics. He said, yeah, man. He said, they think we're just a bunch of highly intellectual circles of the literary elite, so-called, of the 1950s. Mr. Author of the Year, instead of wearing a tweed coat with patches on his sleeves, smoking a pipe, and seeing a psychiatrist and having a writer's block, was the king of hangoutology with anybody and everybody. And he wore the same clothes he wore when he was brought up in Lowell, because he was the same person. And it didn't occur to him he had to suddenly cut off his old friends, his heritage and everything. And he said, no. And I saw, oh my gosh, there are people that Christian people who feel that they're Catholics. And in the Jewish communities, many, there are people who came over, like some of my folks did from Germany, who thought that the later arrivals from Poland and from Ukraine,
Ukraine,
were low class trash, because they weren't Germans, and they hadn't come over 30 or 40 years later. President Kennedy straightened a lot of that out after he was nominated for the Democratic president. So it was definitely he was going to run against Mr. Nixon. Someone said, well, Mr. Kennedy, here you are running for the president of the United States. You're the first person of Catholic descent and a practicing Catholic ever running for president of the United States as an Irish American. Do you feel now that you are lace curtain Irish? That was a term used for folks who came over a long time ago and really made something for themselves in this country. Or shanty Irish, that means somebody just off the boat. He said, how many generations do you have to be in this country before you're considered to be an American? Wham! That question was never asked of him again. And we saw that with the Cubans that came over here. And some of my distant cousins left in 1960, not because they hated the original dictator, and they loved Castro when he first showed up, and then after about a year of that, they figured, man, this sucks. We got to come to the 90 miles away to America and start all over again. So they left. But very often, the term Marialito was used by Cubans who had been here long enough. So when the second wave came over, they had a tough time because they were considered to be nouveau arrivistes. That means people who just showed up recently. So you always find that bigotry, and you go to a neighborhood and you're the first person who wasn't born in that neighborhood or that state, and you have to prove that you're cool. So this is something that always goes on. And when you understand that it goes on for everybody and anybody, then what you learn is not to be that way yourself.
Yes.
I have a story about newcomer. When I came first month into New York in '84, I went to the party in the Bronx, and when I knocked at the door, the host greeted me and said, "I heard you are a cucumber." And then I said, like, cucumber? I thought some club, crazy club in Bronx. So I told him, you look like a cucumber to me. And he laughed like a crazy all night. He was laughing. So month passed, and later a friend of mine told me what really happened. When the guy, because I barely knew English, so and it was noisy a little bit, but when he opened the door, he said, "I heard you are a newcomer," and I told him, "You look like a cucumber to me." So,
Well, Floyd Red Crow Westerman again said, Dave, he said in the Lakota language, the word ethnic to us is a code word for subhuman. So everybody is an ethnic person. Everybody except for the Native American folks, I guess, are boat people on some level. And we all have to realize that's what we have in common. We're all over here trying to figure out what is a real American? What is it about? How are we going to get along with everyone else? And it's a, but we all have the same common colonization of thinking in terms of groups and colors and packaging and income and physical looks and station and status and all that stuff. And that's always been a mess. But, you know, ever since Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, the rents have been too high.
yeah.
Men and women have been scuffling, trying to figure out how the heck to get along together. So all these problems we have been here. That's part of the scene. And it's nobody's fault that is that way. But Miles Davis said it perfectly in his song, So What? It's been that way. It is that way. It will always be that way. But there are other things more worthy of our attention and our involvement so we can understand that and get beyond that, not pretend that it's not there, but say, if it is there, so what?
Yeah.
That's
Considering the situation, I think people are actually very cooperative. They drive on two-way streets. They don't crash. You know, it's like a billion car on the road, but
right.
they're really driving pretty much carefully. And people, when your head is about to hit cement floor, there's always somebody to put the pillow. Most of the people are actually nice mostly. That's my experience. Yeah.
That's all right. What are you
Well,
guys working on these days? You two belong to the creative artist class, and David, you start. What are you working at?
well, I'm going to be.
Commissions?
I'm working on a piece for Elmira Darvarova called "Voyages for Unaccompanied Violin," and one is going to
Ah,
be
yes.
a different place. One is going to be in my old basement apartment, kind of based on the wonderful blues and music that I heard in that neighborhood and I grew up with and incorporated in so many, as well as playing. The one of the movements is going to be based on some of the other from places I went in the Middle East, and then the third movement will be based on the wonderful folkloric music that comes from the United States down south. And it's really a thrill. That I'm also setting. I was commissioned for the Village Trip, which is not my name, but of which
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
artist alumni this year, and I was commissioned to write a piece for them for two classical guitars and a classical mezzo soprano using McDougal Street blues and other things that he wrote as a boy from Lowell coming to New York and falling in love with the village as well as falling in love with America. And not things that I did when I played with him where I was making it up on the spot, but trying to create something that would be a piece of music using those instruments so the people who play guitar, who can read music and are concert guitar players and a concert singer can also do what I do with jazz and folk musicians all the time, but write a piece that can be a piece of music as well. And I'm going to carve out a hunk of this summer where I'm just going to put a big no. I'm composing and just get a big. I've got started on both of them, and I'm also working on my fourth book, which is due after Dean Berkenkamp, my editor, finishes his book, which he's writing about different people's stuff about what I've been doing. And they're finishing up a new film about me, which is going to be completed when I get my honorary degree from
New England Conservatory.
New England Conservatory, and a bunch of other stuff. But mostly, I'm also playing a bunch of folk festivals and jazz festivals and conducting a classical concert in Kerrville and doing a lot of other things that are just playing Farm Aid again, things that I just love to do that are so much fun that even when I have to travel all day and get there and sometimes come home with nothing, it doesn't make any difference because it's so stimulating that I realize how lucky I am to do what I love to do and not have anybody forcing me to do what I was told all my life. What you really should do, you can do all that other stuff later. I said after the Manchurian Candidate in 1962, when I was offered a fortune to do a whole bunch of film scores and things that I couldn't do, I would have to get ghostwriters and just become another hack. I just said, nah, I'd rather take the impossible path and do what I felt I was put to do. I told my lawyer was furious. This was like 60 years ago. He said, "You're a fool." And I said, "Well, so are a lot of people. That's just the way I feel. Maybe it's not so." He said, "You can do all that stuff later." I said, "Man, there is no later." Charlie Parker.
That's 60 years ago.
There's only Latin.
Time every day in our life. Now is the time.
Hey, specific question with Jack Kerouac. Have you ever set his texts away, like his words sung to music?
Oh yeah, well I set part of the Lonesome Traveler for a cantata that I wrote.
Uh-huh.
Like he suggested 50 books I should read, not just of his, to get to get the excuse me the different seasons in America. Let me take a sip of my
Yes.
tea. Ah, now I've recovered from the hot air attack of
Yeah.
for myself. I took part of the Lonesome Traveler and I set that to music. And I've also taken other texts of his, of course, and I set part of what I did so often when I wrote a piece for the commission by the Library of Congress for the National Symphony. And I set 3 of his texts with a string orchestra accompaniment so that a narrator, which was E.G. Marshall, could also narrate that with a symphony, and it wouldn't just be, the one school of art called whatever, where they have one page with enough instructions to start World War III, but no music, which is something
Where's the music?
my publisher said. I said, "David, this music is a bunch of crap, but it sells like hotcakes." He was so, Mr. Henderson, God bless him, he was so impressed, I guess, by when I sent him my sacred service, which was melody, harmony, and counterpoint, and my piano sonata and other pieces, that I wasn't writing squeak, barf, belch, or whatever.
You do have a body of liturgical music, David.
Yeah, and because of that, he assigned me, and he said, "Well, for 10 years, I can give you $50 a year, but we'll put out your classical music." I said, "Well, man, if that's the case, I'll go back and work in the post office or be a Greenwich Village movie man again anytime." That's what I always dreamed of my whole life. Publishers of Mozart and Beethoven. I said, "Woo, look out." And then I was offered $10,000 a year. This was a lot of money, still is, but then it was like humongous for this other publisher. My lawyer said, "David, you've hit pay dirt." I said, "Well, let me speak to the gentleman who's offering me all that money, and I'm the same person to both people, and see what they say." So I said that he explained to me all the things he wanted me to do, which I would never want to do. And I said, "Well, suppose I took that 10,000 a year. I'm a single man," which I was at that time with no kids, living in an $80 a month apartment. I said, "I've lived very modestly. Suppose I took all that money and I paid to get the stuff engraved and printed." He said, "No." I said, "Why is that?" He said, takes up too much shelf space. He said, quote, I never forgot it. We're a nuts and bolts business. And I realized if he was running a hardware store, he only has so much room for the nuts and bolts and shovels, and he has to support his family. But that was not the place for me to be because they were paying me all that money so that I wouldn't be a composer anymore. So I
David,
took
this
the
was
other.
all before C.F. Peters.
Now, 60 years later, I'm still with them.
Yeah,
My music is available all over the world.
of the world. Yeah.
And to the extent that it is done, and it's getting done more and more, uh, I'm glad that I made that dumb choice. And I encourage everyone, follow your career death wish to the max. Because if you feel that's what you were put here to do, then do it. Hopefully, something good will come out of it. And in the meantime, if you're doing it, then you're doing what you were put here to do in the first place. And that's a good thing. And it's good for your health. You have more fun, you meet nicer people, and you have a good time each day somehow. That's pretty important too. I said, people are obsessed with building a career. I said, I had never had a desire to have a career. I hoped someday that my music would have a career.
Right.
Well, that our art will
Or transcends.
outlive us.
Yes.
Yeah, not vice versa. Yeah. So
David, some of the projects that I'm thinking of, Frank McCourt. Is that something? There were sketches. That's something that could never be completed.
I wanted to do it with him so much. And every time I would get together with him, he'd say, David, this could be the greatest piece. Mesa Manhattan. We're going to describe the whole history. And then he said, David, I never dreamed when I was a high school teacher and hanging out with you at my brother's bar that we would ever be doing something of this magnitude. And there are all kinds of people interested in it. But I have so many things that I'm doing. And he was on the bestseller list for 3 years. He got to be so famous that he hardly had a chance to even write his books or do anything. And every time I speak to him, he'd say, yes, yes, I know what you're calling about. I'll call you back. And finally, he said, I think I've got the time that we can do this. And then he unfortunately, got the melanoma and he passed on. And I loved him. And I've spent every minute with him. Was a joy. And I'm still great buddies with his brother, Maliki. In fact, we're playing together the end of this month for the Theater of the New City. And they're wonderful programs. They have the Festival of the Lower East Side, and they do my birthday program with me every year. And Crystal Field, who runs it, was in Splendor in the Grass in 1960. Is a great kid actress, still a great kid actress, and she's in her 80s now, and still has a wonderful, wonderful theater and does wonderful stuff for New York City. And I came to her mortgage burning party when she somehow got a mortgage for that theater, so she owns it, so she can't have anybody coming in and saying, what you really need to do to become a greater success, and then doing the same old crap that everybody else is doing, going way in the hole, over budget, and going out of business, producing garbage. She never accepted the death knell of the theater as an art form. Neither did the Actors Studio, which I'm honored to be a lifetime member of. Neither did Tom Oppenheim, Stella Adler Studio, and a lot of the other great people who teach acting in the theater. And also there's many music schools, small ones, that are that way. And there are many people all over the country who increasingly are realizing small is beautiful and the commitment is everything, and that you can do something good. It just takes longer, harder, and you have to be better than is expected. It's always been that way. And now with the internet, there's the possibility to get some kind of information out there, not be underneath that rock where you either are made invisible or you're like the tail being wagged by the dog. So
Yeah.
the wonderful singer-songwriters or anybody, if they have something that gets out there by a miracle, sells enough records, then you're supposed to go out and plug that and somehow make your next project, which is supposed to sell more. So you're never really saying, well, wait a minute, maybe I'd like to try something different. Or maybe you're told, well, now you have to do something because this is what possibly is going to. So most people, that's why they had that wonderful show, Where Are They Now? And they showed it. And they show somebody playing in a ballpark and then working in a gas station. And you realize that they're just the tail being wagged by that dog, and that what they do has nothing to do with the value of what they're doing in the minds of those who are selling it. And you become at the mercy, and you're actually working for the company as the tail being wagged by what they want you to do. That was what was so great about the Grateful Dead. When they were finally approached by Mercury Records, they were told, well, you guys are wonderful being in indie, which they didn't use at the time, but we can really make you super colossal. And Jerry Garcia and his pals said, look, we're doing just fine. We're selling out huge places all over the world. We play live, which is what music is about. And we sell some records too. So they say, if you want to do something with us, you have to let us continue doing what we want to do. And if not, we really appreciate your kind offer, but we don't need you to make us something that we already are. And amazingly enough, they went along with it, and they continued just to be as terrific as they were and still are, those who were playing. And there are a lot of people like that. And a lot of the artists, like who were really super gigantic, popular, uh, like that wonderful uh, singer songwriter from, I guess, originally from Oakland. I'm not sure, in California, Santana. He just kept on doing what he loved to do. And then finally, when he supposedly came back, when he got a big hit record, he'd already had never left where he came back from, and continued doing it. Dizzy played up until he passed away doing what he loved to do. And so many other people have done that throughout history, including Leonard Bernstein, and way before that, Tchaikovsky, Berlioz, Bach, Mozart, all the way going back to Shakespeare, or the Greek tragedies of Aeschylus, still hip, still relevant. And in the visual arts, you can go all the way back to the Lascaux cave paintings 25,000 years ago. Those guys and gals, whoever was doing it, put up those amazing kind of pictograph, graffiti, artistic reportage. People come from all over the world, spend a whole lot of money getting an airplane to southern France, then spend a whole lot of money to get into the cave. No one's asked for a refund, because those things still are hip. They're still relevant. So for anybody watching this program, when you're told what you're doing is hopeless, there's no demographics for it, that's not the field to begin. That's fine for people who are saying that, and probably they're very brilliant. They might even be related to you, but hang out with somebody else.
On that note, let's finish. This is the 11th Hangoutology, number 11th, and the next one,
11. Wow.
next one will be 12. So full year. Next one, and I will be in June. I will be in Croatia at that time,
Good night.
and then next Hangoutology I will be in Portugal,
Oh
and
boy,
next one in Texas.
fantastic.
So,
It's
so
wonderful.
it's always good to see you, David and Michael.
Yes, pleasure's mine.
Yeah, and let's continue.
Dave, it's always a fantastic message that you present.
I want to ask you, if I may, Nenad, could you say something in case there are any of our friends listening who are not aware of all the work that you've done in
Yes.
ping pong, and how that helps out people with Parkinson's, that the general public would say, Parkinson's, oh, that's some disease for old people. we don't want to hear about that and dismiss it like it's not there. Ping pong is just something that's played by people that aren't smart enough to hold up a tennis racket. Both things are diminished, and you've shown how therapeutic they can be and what a beautiful experience that is, not only for people who have Parkinson's and who can play ping pong, but for all of us to get healthier. And if you could tell us a little bit about that, I'd love to hear about it again. And I know everybody else would too.
I would play the 5 minutes video if you don't mind. That will explain the best.
Well, sometimes that's the way to do it.
Let me see if I can do that. Just a moment. Just a moment, if I can technologically conquer that.
David, I like the way you put it. Ping pong and, being combined in such a way that it elevates both topics,
Exactly. I remember seeing that wonderful video that you did where you were showing. Oh,
Here we go.
Oh, you're putting one up now? Great.
People usually say, "Why me?" I never said that. Why me? Of course, it's not easy thing to hear. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2010.
It is my very great pleasure to introduce from Croatia, Nenad Bach.
Nenad Bach!
I went around the world twice. Just played with symphony orchestra, performed with Pavarotti and Bono and U2 on the stage, and met kings and queens and presidents of countries. I lived my life fully, and I don't know. I inhale life. I've seen people with Parkinson's. It's not easy to observe other people deteriorating. But I never regret that I got Parkinson's, because it maybe prolonged my life, because it slowed me down. It's a self-preservation of body, Maybe body knows more than I do. Nobody dies because of Parkinson's. They die with Parkinson's. Somehow I felt that I can do something about it.
What made you feel that way?
I really don't know. Maybe eternal optimist. Something that looks impossible to me, it's possible just with time. And that's my strength. Playing ping pong for me means freedom. Free of past, free of future. Once you observe the rotating, spinning ball in the air, you don't think about anything else. It started a couple of years ago when a friend of mine invited me to play ping pong. And then I noticed that next day I feel much better, even cognitive better, thinking better, and moving better. So I started to play more than once a week. I noticed the difference. That was a breakthrough for me. It was something, it means that I reversed the symptoms. So they called it neuroplasticity. Whether I rewire all neurons or I create new ones, nobody knows it. But something happened. 2.5 years ago, I started the Ping Pong Parkinson non-for-profit organization. We have around 10 people with Parkinson and around 10 volunteers. They come like back down, we barely move, and then suddenly they start to play ping pong, and they are smiling, they are running around like a children, you know. You have to see the smiles of these people. You see immediately the difference in people. There's some magic in watching, observing that spinning ball. It's amazing. It's like a butterfly from. It's amazing transformation. There are around 10 million people around the world affected by Parkinson's. We are playing for all of this who cannot play. We want to move things. We want to shake the world, not just to shake ourselves.
Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world live as one.
Yeah, really. Yeah, that was fantastic. Wow. David, it's like a waterfall. Wow.
So
Whoa.
let me some noise from David.
Yes. Is that online, Nenad? That was so beautiful.
It is online, yes.
Ah,
It's called Nenad Who Plays Ping Pong.
look for it.
Yeah.
YouTube? Yeah.
Vimeo, original, Vimeo and YouTube. Vimeo is better. I should play Vimeo, but I'll send to you. Let
If
me
you
know.
thank you.
Yeah, Barbara Koppel was the one, she won the Oscar twice. And what a wonderful, I've had the pleasure of doing a score for her about kids from Pakistan and Syria when they came over and had to go to Canada
Mm.
and how they became Canadians. She's an amazing person. And what a terrific film that is. Like everything that she, what a great story. Nenad, I never saw that, man. Thank you for showing that.
Yeah.
And I hope,
How new is it? Nenad, when was that made?
It's already a year or a year and a half already.
Oh.
It got attention at Cannes Festival and number of awards. That's,
Oh, wonderful.
yeah. Anyway, so let's conclude this
Nice way to
number
conclude.
11, and I hope to see you in a month. A great idea, David, to have Hangoutology, and it's a pleasure to see you always in Michael.
Always a pleasure. And of course, for Hangoutologists, next month, be there or be square. That's the worst thing you could be, right, David?
well, I think Charlie Parker, long before it was ever more popular in the 60s, said to me in about 4 o'clock in the morning, man, the hippest thing is to be a square. And he saw Charlie Parker and is wearing his suspenders, which he had under his suit. He looked like a Kansas City farmer.
Is it reveling in being a square?
He was certainly one of the hippest people in the planet ever, but he was also proud of his squareness and his gentility and his decency and beautiful way that he spoke to people, the way he encouraged young, hayseed hopefuls like thousands of people, including myself, and still does today, and how he somehow managed to deal with everything and still create that beauty And the warmth and kindness that he still shared with other people was just something that was remarkable. And he said, the hip thing to be a square, he also said, do what I say, don't do as I do. In other words, he explained that he got as a drug addiction because after a car accident, the doctors gave him all kinds of morphine as they did in those days. And no kids at that time knew anything about the word addiction. And most doctors didn't. It was just considered to be a crime. And the hospital was just trying to take some kid to get them out of their pain. So he got strung out, as they say. He became addicted to that and never got over it. At the very end of his life, he said, I could see a doctor and it would cost a fortune and I'd feel terrible 2 hours later, no matter what they recommended with all my ailments. He said, I buy a bag of that stuff and I'm cool for 20 hours. But then I got to get another one. And it was just something that all of us can fall prey to. And he told a lot of us younger folks, don't do this. Don't do as I do as I say. And he also mentioned the hippest things to be a square. And I mentioned that because the last thing anybody would want to leave is, we are something, you're not something, therefore go shove it. That's more the common horror of the world we live in. There's always has to be an enemy. And the fact is that whether we like it or not, we're all together.
The circle and square.
Exactly.
We'll hang together.
Well, anyway, we are running out of memory, so I will say goodbye to you, and I'll see you in a month.
And bless you. Have a great trip over to Croatia when you go back there.
Okay.
And I guess next month we'll be speaking to you through the magic of this from Croatia.
Yes, correct.
Oh, right. And we send all of us, I think I could say for Michael Spudik, who I admire and known him quite a while now, and yourself, that we're happy if you listen to us and hopefully know that there are grown-ups, as we laughingly are called, who care about you and know that you have something to offer as well, and that this will encourage you to do what you've got to offer. And if you already offer something, keep on doing that and find other people to share that with.
Yeah. Be who are you meant to be.
Amen.
All the best. Good night, boys.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
My second waiters, my second busboys.
Second bus boy. Nice
Omar.
meeting.
This is the ultimate club.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Bye.
Good night. Good night. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.